Hey guys, K2's Retro Workshop here. Today, we're going to crack open my Imac G3. I hope that's a joke at this point, but... So, I've put this off for quite a while. And the reason I've put it off is because like pretty much every other late 90s Mac out there, or hell 90s Mac for that matter, the beige and white plastics that they used is brittle. You look at an all-in-one Power Mac, and it's like the case cracks or something like that. I mean, it's really bad on some of these. This particular machine, the translucent stuff is fine, but right behind this front fascia here, you've got a white plastic frame that holds the CRT in place and some other components. It's very brittle, and so I've put off opening this as pretty much as long as I can. And I do get a lot of use out of this machine, so I really don't want to trash it. So that's why I'm wanting to just do a one and done, open it, get everything I need done, and go. But there's a reason that I have to open it now. The speakers are dead. It took them a while. The dry New Mexico air and stuff kind of helps stuff from rotting and stuff like that, but it finally happened. Now, I have a few options here for replacement that I've picked up. This is your standard, just eBay $10 shipped pair of neodymium speakers. I don't particularly like these. I don't think they have good quality. But we're going to actually test them. I've got 3 other speakers here to test. This is a Peerless brand speaker. Seems like a much higher quality speaker. A Dayton Audio paper cone speaker for laughs, I guess. I don't think that one's going to come out on top. And a Tang Band speaker. This one's all black, but it's an expensive speaker. But on paper, this also has the best potential for sound quality. Now I've got some extra speaker pods and such. We're going to set up a test, and we are going to see which one of these speakers is actually the best for that application. As you could tell, it booted a little slow. Like I said, this thing's it's getting a little tired here. So I'm going to shut that down so that we're not flickering in your face or anything like that. Another thing that I'm wanting to do is the hard drive. Right now it's got an SD card and an IDE to SD converter, and so one option for me is to just throw in a 128 gig high endurance card, be done with it. It has worked fine for years, but again, I would like to test what the best is. I also have a compact flash extreme card. This is just a passive converter to the IDE bus. There's nothing special about it. If this comes out on top, I'll buy a bigger one. We'll have to see on that one. Last option I have for hard drive, your standard solid state SATA drive with a bridge. And this is probably the most reliable and the best way to go despite performance, but I would still like to run some benchmarks and see what is actually the best. Now, it wouldn't be K2's Retro Workshop without at least a little bit of soldering, right? Some of it is planned. Like, some of it's just unavoidable. We open this guy up, it's got 23-year-old capacitors. Some of them are going to need replaced. At minimum, I plan on recapping the power supply board in here. Not the analog board, but the power supply board, because I do know that those big bulk electrolytics do start to leak. So that's going to be done. However, in my years of research on these machines, I have found that back in the heyday of these things, you could send your motherboard in and have a processor swap done on it. The processor they would swap in is this one. This is a PowerPC G4 processor at 500 megahertz. So, as a part of this upgrade, I'm going to take the G3 out of this machine, put a G4 in there, and another thing that they would do during that upgrade is double your level 2 cache. And that's something I'm going to do as well. I don't know which chip it actually needs for that yet, so I'm going to have to find out when I open this guy up. But like I said, I've been trying to reduce opening this as much as I can, so I haven't done it. And I do have a spare processor here in case I screw up trying to do some BGA soldering on this motherboard. And yeah, those are my upgrades. Like I said, I use this machine a lot, and I really want to give it some upgrades and see what we got. So yeah, let's carefully take it apart. Something to note when you're taking the bottom off of this thing, there's a couple of tabs at the front that are supposed to pop off, and they quite literally do that now. The plastic in the front, like I said, is super brittle, so it's gonna break them off. I don't think there's anything you can do about it. There's no way around it. Just kind of go with it. Mine have been broken off since I first got it and pulled it apart, and it goes straight back together, and it's just fine without them. Especially, you know, sitting on the desk. Most of the weight is pushing down on that bottom plate, so you don't have to worry about it. This stuff is pretty normal here. You can see me pointing things out because I had originally narrated this, and it ended up being 5 minutes long, and I didn't really want to include all that. So yeah, this is just normal screws and normal pulling stuff apart. There's not much of anything special here. Fishing out screws and things like that. So yeah, motherboard's out. Let's see what we got. So we've reached our first roadblock of the project. I was going off of older pictures that I have of motherboards, and I'm guessing that the picture that I had was of a model of iMac that I no longer have. I went from a DV400 to the Indigo 500 because I wanted the faster processor. And I'm guessing the pictures that I have are of that motherboard. This motherboard is equipped with the 750CXE processor. So a little bit of, I guess, history on this. The first iMacs came out with the PPC 750 processor. That processor had completely external cache on it. The next processor was only out for about a year, I believe in 2000, and that was the 750CX. The 750CX incorporated cache on the processor, but still had provisions on the motherboard, and there would be 256K of cache there. So they would end up with 512K total. Well, when they went to the CXE, the motherboard was redesigned to remove the external cache. Well, the G4 7410 processor that fits here relies on external cache. It doesn't have on-die level 2 cache, and as you can see here, there are no provisions for cache on either side of this board. So if I was to do a processor swap on here, I would have no level 2 cache. So no processor swap. But something I did notice, which kind of annoys me, to be quite honest, is the video RAM setup on this motherboard. So one of the selling points of the later models was that they upgraded from the Rage LT, or no, VR, I think LT is the same thing anyway, to the 128 Pro. Now, the big selling point difference between those is a 64-bit data bus versus a 128-bit graphic data bus. And on this particular setup, we've got one SD RAM chip here, which is curious. They actually have a SG RAM spot on this motherboard, even if it's not populated on this one. And then there's one chip here with another opening. These are both 32-bit chips, which means that my graphics card, while being a 128 Ultra, is essentially a 128 VR, and similar, very similar to the low-cost, low-profile video cards of the time, which, admittedly, this system works just fine. But it was kind of irritating to see that what's touted as an Ultra setup is actually just a 64-bit OEM setup. So, yeah, let's continue on. Let's take a look at some speakers and see if we can fix our sound. All right, so we have our 4 little sound pods here. This is the blown units, either the bad units out of the Indigo. But it looks like one of them is way worse off than the other. This one, it's all torn and completely eaten up. It looks terrible. I don't know if you can see that there, but yeah, it's separated completely from the foam. This one is actually mostly intact, so I'm going to see if I can't get an original sound characteristic of this sound pod. I know the surround, being close to end of life isn't going to be perfect, but it'd be good to know at least a baseline of what they sounded like in the machine before they died. So we've got those two. I've already installed these two, so here's your eBay $10 pair special, and this is the Peerless model. And let's go ahead and get a little setup going over here and see what we can figure out about these. Alright, so this is how we're going to do this. I've got my calibrated Dayton Audio microphone here. It's calibrated for frequency response, not necessarily amplitude. So we can get apparent measurements, but not, we get relative measurements, but not anything like super substantial. But that's fine. I'm really after a before and after and an overall sound and stuff like that. So these are exactly 30 centimeters apart. They're at the same level as one another, pointed directly at one another. And I'm going to run through this app that's going to do some sweeps and stuff, and we'll see what the results are. I'll do this with every one of them. I can leave this positioned where it is and easily swap the balls out and get my measurements. So let's see what we get. All right. These are the speakers that we're going to be testing. This stock speaker was intact enough that I was able to get some stock measurements and then compare all of these. This is a little amplifier I used. It's a little TDA 2030 amplifier, nothing special. Ran it at 12 volts, fixed volume, have the IMM6 calibrated measurement microphone. Good enough for what we're doing here. And so let's take a look at the results. Results are in. You'll notice on the bottom results here that there's a red line going all the way across. This is the 80 decibel line. It helps to visualize the real difference between these speakers. There's a yellow highlight at 125 hertz. This helps kind of show the bottom end a little bit more, and how bad the roll-off is on a couple of these. So on the far left, we have our stock speaker. Obviously, it didn't look like this when I did the test. They used a little bit of glue around the edges to seal the speaker against the frame. Makes sense for the audio quality from the speaker pod and no rattling. But old foam, it made a mess. Not quite on the level of belt out of an old tape deck mess. That rubber goo, but it was a bit to clean up. So the stock speaker, good, neutral sound. There's not much else to say about it. I mean, it was a decent sound. The iMacs do have decent sound stock, even with these little 1-inch drivers. The Peerless model, that particular speaker, you could tell immediately that it was louder. Once I started the test, it was louder. The listening test portion that I did, it was much brighter, and you could really tell that the low end was suffering. If you look at the yellow line there, it had the worst low end response. Now, I'm not expecting to have, deep bass or any of that. These are only 1-inch drivers. And when it comes to bass, there really is no replacement for displacement. So, yeah. The next speaker, the middle one, the eBay $10 a pair special ones, they weren't bad. It was also much louder. It was also brighter, but it was a good speaker. What can I say? I wasn't really holding my breath for that, but it worked, and it worked well. The sound was okay, just like the Peerless model. If you had an iSub or something that you were pairing with this machine, you probably wouldn't even notice a difference. So, take from that what you will. Now, if you want a black speaker instead of a silver speaker, the Dayton Audio paper cone speaker worked well. You could probably argue that the Dayton Audio speaker will last longer because of the surround that it's got and stuff like that isn't going to be as subject to weathering and decay over time like the foam around the other two aluminum cone speakers will. But the three in the middle were all brighter. They were all louder than stock for sure. And they all did suffer a bit more in the bottom end than I expected. So, that's something to note. Now, on the far right, we have the Tang Band. This speaker currently runs $50 a pair if you were to use these. You'll notice that the curve is very similar to the stock speaker. At 125 hertz, it's down a bit, but it's kind of hard to just, fully put into words. But when I went to the listening test on the Tang Band speaker, it sounded good. Really good. It was very neutral. You could tell that the low end, it was actually trying. It sounded great. So I'm definitely going to go with this speaker. And I'm kind of glad that worked out because it was the most expensive one and I would hate to have spent like $60 on speaker that I wasn't going to use. But yeah, the numbers are there. I mean, it truly does sound like the stock speaker. And so if that's what you're going for, that's what you should buy. Otherwise, second place, I would probably put the eBay $10 a pair speaker. It's a no-name. I couldn't find any info on who actually produces them, but it works. It sounds like stock. What can you do? Okay, speaker progress being made. This is going to be the last of the speakers being apart that I'm doing here. I did decide to go with the speaker that, of course, didn't have the little blade connectors on it, so I had to solder on the pigtail. And it also doesn't have the nice little mounting tabs that the factory speaker and the other aluminum cone speakers have. I don't know if you can see that on there, but yeah, right here and right here is a nice little tab that latches in on here. You don't really need glue with those, but these are going to need to be glued in to make sure that they're secure. I think they used glue from the factory, but I'm not totally sure. I'm using this UV 6800 glue. It's clear, it's flexible, it's fairly easy to work with. I have a tube somewhere that's smaller and has a little nozzle on it to make it easier to apply, but I have no idea where that went. So in about 2 hours, when I finally find that, I'll get it applied. This will be curing. And then the capacitors for the motherboard came in from Mouser, so I will be able to do that offline as well, since that's also boring. And yeah, then we'll move on. This is my little setup for letting the glue dry without messing them up. I hope it works well. We'll see. Okay, recap done. Well, mostly. Couple of things. Check your Mouser quantity when you're ordering multiples of a size of a cap to make sure that you've got the right quantity. This ends up being an Elna Serafine cap because that's what I had here. This was a non-polar cap. I did test this cap and it was fine. I could have put this cap back in too and it would have been fine, but whatever. The through-hole caps seemed to be fine. They tested okay. There wasn't really anything wrong with them. I replaced them anyway because I bought them. The surface mount caps, though, there's 7 of them on this motherboard. Most of them had leaked at least a little bit. And so I had to clean up the pads and everything when I did those, but that's just par for the course when it comes to surface mount caps and Apple if you do anything with, 90s apples. There's one thing that Apple did, though, that I'm going to change. They used this little 1mm thick thermal pad to go between the processor and the body of the computer. And that's where the heat sinking occurs. I don't like that. So I picked up some 1mm thick copper plate, and I'm going to cut this to 1 inch by 1 inch, which is the size of the processor here and the size of the mating surface. And I'm going to use 2-part thermal epoxy to attach that. It's from the same people that make Arctic Silver. And I've used it for putting Voodoo heat sinks and stuff back on. It's pretty nice stuff. So I'm going to use that. Part of why I want to do that, though, is because since I can't do a processor swap, I'm going to come over here, and right here on the motherboard, I don't know how clear that is, I'll try to get zoomed in on that when I'm doing the soldering. There's four resistors here, and they're labeled 0, 1, 2, 3. These set the PLL on the chip, on the processor. So I can take this, and right now it matches the configuration for 5 times 100 megahertz to make 500 megahertz. I'm going to change this to times 6, and we're going to see if we can get 600 megahertz out of this thing. If that works just fine, creep it up to 650. If that works fine, maybe even try 700. I'm not going to hold my breath on that. I'm sure they bend these processors to some extent, but that's what we're going to try. So let me get that copper plate glued in, and we'll try overclocking it. Alright, so here we have our Arctic Alumina thermal adhesive. This is a 5-minute epoxy 50-50 mix, just part A, part B. Mix it, you got 5 minutes just about to get stuff set, so we're going to mix it here and very quickly get over to the other, to where the computer is. I love that they used graduated syringes here and then covered it with a label. So, good luck with that. Hopefully, you're good at guessing the amount here. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, obviously, but as you can tell from me doing it. But it does work quite well. I've got Voodoo cards that I've been running for years where the heatsink was reapplied with this, and works great. To get the heatsinks off of those, by the way, I throw them in my deep freeze, and then just a careful placement of a flathead screwdriver. Doesn't take too much effort to get that heatsink right off there. So yeah, we've given it a good mix here. This should be adequate. Let's move over to the computer. Okay, here's our victim. That was literally like 30-second cut right there. Scrape it off of here. Apply liberally to our plate here. See if I can get a little more on there. If it smells like farts, the epoxy is working. So, try to get it even on there. Alright. Now we have our copper plate here. And I'm going to take off the protective layer here. Nice, pretty reflective copper plate. And we are going to stick it on there as straight as possible, and then we're going to hold it for 5 minutes. And I'm not going to make you sit here and listen to me for 5 minutes, so we will cut to when it's done. Right, the epoxy has set, and I've peeled off the little protective cover there. Got a little booger here. It's okay. This will allow us to just put some thermal grease on the motherboard, pop it in. This is perfect, the perfect depth for this. I don't see how a whole lot of dissipation can occur with it perforated like this, but hey, it worked for 500 megahertz. Maybe it'll work at, 700 megahertz. I'm fairly certain this is the same setup that's used for the 700, so we should be okay. Now, I might have to make a little fan that goes on the top of this if, temperatures don't look like I want it to. We'll see about that. But as it stands, we're good to go. Okay, I plugged it in and it didn't explode. So let's turn it on. Beautiful sound. Beautiful sound. Cool. Well, I'm going to start this up. I'm going to do some benchmarks because I want to make sure that we've got a good baseline for our stock hard drive. And then we're going to continue our upgrades. Okay, benchmarking done. And the fastest drive was this guy. A Maxtor Diamond Max Plus 9. Just kidding. This came about 160% of the MacBench 5 stock system, which is a G3 500 system. Not sure why, but I don't really care because I don't plan on using a spinner drive anyway. In second place, we had the compact flash drive. I was kind of expecting this one to do better than it did, but it ended up at 291%, which is just behind the IDE to SD adapter that I've been using for years in this system. And it didn't matter which SD card I put in here, it was always 298%. Very surprising there. But that's where we ended up on that one. The fastest, probably to no one's surprise, is this guy. Just a normal SanDisk solid state drive. This drive paired with this StarTech IDE adapter works in this system and has a result of 433% on the speed. These two adapters here, this Kingwin adapter and this I don't know what this other brand is, like they're probably made in the same factory. Neither one of these will work in this system. And the reason being is once you plug in the CD drive, these quit working. I haven't figured out exactly why. This one, I believe, defaults to cable select. And it should be picking up that it's a master and going to that, but it doesn't work with any other drive on the IDE channel. This one has a jumper on it that you can select master to slave from, but it kind of does the same thing. They only work when they're the only drive on the channel, and since there's only one IDE channel in here and I want the CD drive working, these two are out. The StarTech is more expensive, and because of the power connector on it is going to require me to have an adapter in here, but I was thinking of adding some accessories and having the extra connector at the end of this. Will be kind of nice to get power from eventually. So we're going to install this SSD with this adapter and then get started on overclocking. Alright, I got one last thing to show you on the storage front here. As you can see here, I've got the IDE to SD adapter hooked up, which is the original hard drive that I was using. This doesn't have a master slave select on it, so it's currently hooked up, set as master. And the StarTech adapter is on the SSD right here. I did this to have both drives in here. This machine's only equipped with USB 1, and so it's like 10 megabits per second. If I had about 18 gigs worth of stuff that I needed to copy over, and it was going to be probably a full day worth of copying if I did it from a USB adapter on the hard drive. So what I did was I hooked up an IDE cable, and you can do this as long as you have pin 1 facing, well, it's down on here, towards the power supply, and have the connector plugged in all the way to the opposite end. So you can see here, this is the original cable. It's got the red stripe here, so the red stripe stays over here, but it's only using these pins, so you align the cable over here. You have to file off the key to be able to do this, but I was able to copy about 18 gigs in maybe an hour and a half, all told, so that's the way you can do this. Now I'm going to button this up so that we can get to the good part and I can actually overclock it finally. Okay, we are zoomed in to the motherboard behind the processor. The processor in this machine sits right here. And this is actually kind of nice because I don't have to pull the motherboard every time I go to make a configuration change. If you'll notice, these 4 resistors right here are labeled 0, 1, 2, 3. If we look at the datasheet for the 750CX PowerPC processor, we will see that the 5 times bus multiplier for the PLL configuration is, let's see, 1011, which gives us 1011. Now, I want to try 600 megahertz first. So we want to try 1101, which would be 1101. So to do this, all I should have to do is take this resistor, move it here, and this resistor, and move it here. The reason why I don't just pull this resistor over here and this one over here is because this is a 1K resistor, and these are 10K. I can't find anything in the datasheet that confirms that a pull down resistor has to be 1K versus 10K for a pull up, but I'm going to move it like that anyway, just to make sure I don't mess it up, you know. So yeah, let me go ahead and get these resistors moved, and we'll see what we get. Here we go. We've got our 1, 1, 0, 1. That took a lot less time than I was expecting. Just throw some nice flux on it, 2 soldering irons, come at it from each direction, and pull off this resistor. And then on this one, if you've already got the flux on there, it just sucks right into the spot when you put it down. So let's give it a try. I've still got this guy open and on its side because I'm not exactly sure this is going to work. I would like to do a burn-in if it does to make sure it's stable at this clock speed, but I want to boot it up first and I want you to see it. So let's see if she boots. That's a good sign. I don't think it gets I don't know if it gets adequate cooling set up like this or not, but it works. And again, sorry for the flashing and all that. I don't have a camera set up for doing CRTs yet. So let's see what we get here. So far it hasn't locked up, so that's a good sign. We will oh, this should be a lot of fun trying to figure out. Using this guy on its side should be a load of fun. Are we not? Okay, now it lets me drag. So let's try applications. You know, I don't know if I actually put... So used to being able to just drag in a Windows machine. I try to use the scroll wheel on this frickin' mouse all the time. Oh, I don't know if any of these games require the CD, and I haven't set up Toast. Let's do About This Macintosh and see what we get. Of course I clicked extra. Oh my god. This mouse. It doesn't say anything about the system in this. Do I have control panels? No. No system profiler either. Perfect. I'll tell you what. Let me get something loaded on here, and then I'll get back to you. Sweet. It runs the benchmarks multiple times without a problem. You can see here we're at 113%. The stock processor benchmark at 500 megahertz was 89%. And I gotta tell you, this number kind of annoys me a little bit because it says that the comparison system is the Power Macintosh G3 300. And we're running double the clock speed to be only 13% higher. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. I'm not sure why that's actually the case here, but it works, and it seems stable so far. temperatures aren't crazy or anything like that. So I'm going to put the bottom on this real quick and run it through a series of tests, make sure it's absolutely stable. And if it is, I think we should try for 700. All right, she's done. Beautiful sound. I love the speakers I ultimately ended up choosing. You can't really tell that they're just these weird black dots in there anymore, I don't think. I don't think you can see it on there. I don't know. I guess I never really paid attention to the aluminum speakers in these in the first place, but so yeah, we've got a gig of RAM in here, 128 gig SSD, which did give us about a 50% bump in performance on that front. We've got recapped, which has increased stability quite a bit. The system used to have trouble during large file transfers, and not necessarily between the existing hard drive and the CD drive. It could be between the CD drive and a USB drive or something like that, and it would give me trouble. Not that I try to do those transfers very often, because USB 1 is just, my god. Okay. Now, the let's get Unreal Tournament running on here. Why not? The processor, we didn't get the G4, and that sucks. I did really want to do that swap, but you know, we opened it up and it's just not doable. So we made do with an overclock, which is fine. I kind of like not having to do BGA soldering. So that's nice. But the 20% bump gives you a bump almost everywhere. I ran benchmarks again, and drive performance was up a little bit. Graphics performance was up quite a bit. And that has translated to Unreal Tournament and stuff running a lot better. I've been playing with this thing for about a week, and yeah, everything just runs smoother, it runs quicker. That 20% bump is definitely noticeable. And since the Rage 128 doesn't have built-in texture and lighting, all the geometry setup for games and everything, for 3D anyway, has to be done on the CPU, and therefore the 20% gives you an almost linear increase. The same thing can be said of Voodoo cards and stuff like that, because none of them have the texture and lighting in them. So yeah, this intro here even runs way smoother than it used to. And, you know, like I said in the beginning, I use this machine a lot. I play games on it all the time. It has a permanent place right next to my little workstation here in the workshop for running games, going on the repositories and downloading software and putting them on the other classic Macs I have. Some stuff like that. So yeah, it gets tons of use, and I'm really happy to have it back. The only thing I did as far as the analog board / CRT goes is I did tweak the screen and focus settings to kind of bring it in a bit. This CRT, if you shine a UV light on it, you can see a little bit of burn-in on the title bar. It does have a few hours on it. And so now I'm able to run 50% brightness, 50% contrast, and I have a, you know, a nicely bright screen. There's a lot of room to improve brightness, so I can run tens of thousands of hours on this CRT and still crank it and focus it. That'll be nice. I have noticed in the desktop, especially at VGA resolutions, that there's a little bit of distortion on the right-hand side, depending on where title bars and stuff are. So eventually I'm going to have to get to the analog board on this thing. I don't want to, but it's looking like I might end up having to do it anyway. So that'll be a future project. And yeah, so I'm super happy about what we got. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And yeah, I'll see you next time.